working with your character and paragraph formatting, the first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure that you're on your type tool. You'll remember from previous lessons that your control panel up here is going to come up. And that's important because that's where you go to do your character and paragraph formatting. And when you come up here to your control panel, you're going to see these two buttons over here all the way on the left. And this is where you decide whether you want to have options to work on your character formatting or on your paragraph formatting controls. And by just clicking on the different buttons, you can switch back and forth between the two control panel options to do either your character formatting or your paragraph formatting. And for right now, the first thing that we're going to focus on is character formatting. And let's go ahead and highlight this headline up here. And you will see that in here in your control panel options, this first little box is going to be the kind of font that you are using. And by going to this downward facing arrow and clicking on that, this is how you can change your font. So let's go down here and click on Constantia. And as you can see, the second you do that, that changes your font to a different font. If you don't like that, come back up here and you can find a different font by just scrolling down through the list of available fonts until you find something that you like. Now, let's say that you like that font, but obviously it needs some changes to fill this space. Well, by using your character formatting control panel options, you can start to work with the font so that you get something that fits better into this space. And the next box down is going to be where you select the style of font. And right now it says regular, but you can change that to different combinations. You can do a lighter font, you could do a light italic, you could do a semi-bold, or you could do a full bold italic if you wanted to. But up here in this little box, this is where you change to a different style of font, your bold, your italics, your lighter versions. That's in your second box. Now coming from here over to the next box that's on the control panel that's up and to the right, this is where you actually select your font size. And right now it looks like we have two different font sizes going on in this headline, and you can tell that because the box is blank. And when you have all of your font size the same size, like say if you move this to 72, you will see that it's showing 72 points in that box. And then next up on your list in the control panel, you have the ability to change your line sizes. Now this isn't really going to do much for this because it's a single line, but if you were say down here in your text for your paragraph and you come up here to your line spacing or your leading, then you can come down and select maybe a 24 point, and that's going to make the spaces between your lines bigger. And if you don't like that, you can go back to say a 14, which is close to a single spacing. And that looks pretty good, so we'll go ahead and move on. Next up on the control panel, you have the ability to change things like your capitalization and whether it's a superscript, an underline, a strike through, or a subscript. And the first thing on the list is whether you want to change your capitalization. And let's say that this first block of text you want to emphasize by making it all caps. If you come up here and you go all caps, you can see that InDesign immediately changes all of this text into the all caps format. And you do that just by hitting this all caps button. You could also go right below that and do small caps. And when you click on this, what you get is a effect where the capitalization of the letters is still capitalized, but the second letter of each word is going to be smaller. But anything in your paragraph that would normally be a lowercase letter is actually in a small cap. Next up on the list, we have superscript and subscript. And superscript and subscript, what they do is basically if we add in a number here and we go and highlight it, if you superscript it, it's going to make it a small number that's aligned at the top of your text. So it's like bringing it to a power of 1. Now subscript, on the other hand, if you go ahead and click on that, That's going to do the same thing, but it's going to put it below the line. So that's two options that you have, is superscript and subscript, if you need some fancy character formatting. Next to that, you have an underline. Now, it seems like underline should be over here in your text styles, but it's actually a button over here on the control panel next to your caps and your superscript subscript. And if you want to do an underline, all you have to do is hit that button and it immediately applies an underline. Now, if you want to get really fancy, you can go ahead and hit strike through, and that's going to go ahead and put a strike through that text. Now, the next set of tools on your control panel for character formatting are what are called advanced formatting options. And these tools usually are available in your word processor, but they're kind of hidden in the program and they may not be things that you're completely familiar with. And the first two of these options, which is on your control panel, are kerning and tracking. And kerning and tracking basically deal with the spacing between different letters in your text. And kerning deals specifically with the spacing between two letters. If you don't like the way that this I and A are spaced and you think that they could get a little bit closer together to make the text look better, all you have to do is click in between the two letters and then come up to your kerning, which is right here, and then you'll see the current spacing is at 0. But when you come down, you can select different spacing. And if you go, like, say, -50, that's going to make the space in between the two letters less. And if that's too much, you can change it to, say, maybe 25. And if that's still too much, you could go back to 0 and then just drop it down slowly with this drop down arrow. Now, if you wanted to make the spacing bigger, you just go the opposite way. Kerning really helps out when you have two letters that for some reason, because of the font, look funny when they're spaced next to each other. It happens with some fonts, and it can be really helpful in those situations. Now, tracking seems like it's kind of the same thing because it also messes with the space between different letters. But what tracking does is it actually does it for more than two letters at a time. So if you wanted to affect the spacing of this entire line, you would go to tracking, and then you can come down here and you can make it either smaller or bigger just by adjusting your arrows. And the same as your kerning, you can come up here and change with more of a percentage instead of doing it incrementally. So that's tracking and kerning. Next up on the list, you have the option to change either the vertical scale of your font or the horizontal scale. And this is done as a percentage. And right now, the font is at 100%, both directions. But if we wanted this font to remain that wide but fill the space vertically, what we would do is come up here to our vertical scale and go ahead and change that to maybe a 150%. And as you can see, it's now longer, but the font stayed the same width. And that's what you can do with your vertical scale. Now let's put that back at 100, and let's say that we like the height of the font, but we'd actually like it to take up some more room across this line. Now to do that, we just change our horizontal scale. So we would come up here and change that to maybe 150%. And now you can see that it's much fatter and it's taking up way too much line. But maybe at 110, it actually fills that space a little bit better. So that's something that you can do if you find yourself with a font that you really like a lot, but you just want it to be a little bit thicker and take up a little bit more space. You can start playing with your vertical and horizontal scaling, and that will change the way the font looks and lays out in an area. Couple of other things that you have here in your control panel. You can change the baseline. The baseline is the line, the imaginary line on which your font sits, and if you go up, it will slowly shift that baseline up or down depending on which way you want to go. And right here you have the skew, which is a false italic. Now this font actually has the ability to do an italic here on your font styles. But some fonts don't allow you to do an italic through the regular font styles. So you can go over here to the false italic or skew and just go up on the percentage that you want to skew your font, and that will create an italic for you. Finally, this button right here, this is actually for character styles. And right now we don't have any character styles, but we're going to be talking more about character styles and applying them in a later lesson. But a couple of other things that you can do with type is if you come up here to the type menu and you go down to find font and you click on that, you're going to get a dialog box, and in this dialog box, it will show you 4 fonts in the document, and these are the fonts that are currently being used in your document. And if you click on them, and then you hit Find First, it will find where you're using that font in your document. So if you want to change a font, you can use the Find Font tool to easily find everywhere in the document where you used an old font that you want to replace. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about paragraph formatting. And to go to your paragraph formatting options, you just go ahead and click on that button, and that brings up your paragraph formatting control panel. And now we're going to go ahead and come down here, and we're going to go and select this little set of text. And the first buttons that you have here in this section, this is all your alignment options. And this is where on the top line you decide whether you want to align left, center, right, or towards the spine. And let's go ahead and just click Align Center to give you an idea of how that looks. And it immediately changes your alignment for that particular block of text. Now going over to the middle and selecting that bit of text, we'll look at the next line. And this is the same options but with a justification. And when you go ahead and you justify left, what happens is when you justify your text, it makes it run so that it goes from margin to margin and fills up the space in between your individual characters so that it runs from margin to margin without a ragged line like you see there on the regular aligned left text. Now the next block of options has to do with indenting, and you can do a left indent or a right indent, and then this one with the big line through it on the top line, this actually indents the entire block of text that you have selected. So if you want the whole thing that you have selected indented by, say, 5 points, just go ahead and you do that, and you put in that number, and you have it all indented. Now, if you only want a single line indented, you're going to come down here to one of these options. And this gives you the option to either do a first line indent to the left or a last line indent to the right. If those are something that you're interested in doing, you just select that right up there. If you want to get a little bit fancier with your text formatting, your paragraph formatting, you can do so with some of these options here. This actually gives you a space before your paragraph, and that shows you that anytime you have a paragraph break, it's going to add a space before the next paragraph. So like here to here. And if you want a space between them, you just go and make that bigger. Kind of in the same vein, you have this one which actually puts a space after your paragraph. It has kind of the same effect, but as you play with your character formatting, you will find that there's times when you want to use one over the other, and that will become obvious as you work with documents. Next, you have some really fancy options. You can do a drop cap, and that will give you a fancy letter for the first letter in a paragraph, and this is where you decide how big that letter is going to be. You just go and make it as big as you want, and each one of these represents a number of lines. So right now it's 2 lines big, but you can make it even bigger than that if you want. And then if you want to get even fancier, you can come over here and you can drop cap 1 or more characters. Next up, we have a couple of buttons that will probably be a little more useful or used more in your laying out, and that is the buttons for bulleted lists and numbered lists. And this is the easiest way to create bulleted or numbered list in InDesign. All you have to do is just click on this button, and that just immediately gives you a bullet for your paragraph. And if you have text selected that has more than one paragraph, like over here, and you use it, you will see that it gives you a bullet for every one of your paragraphs. Now, if you want something more interesting than a bullet, you can go ahead and hit the numbered list, and it will automatically number it for you. Finally, over here, you have a couple of options that have to do with columns. And say you want to go ahead and make this into a 2-column layout just in that particular area. You just go ahead and hit 2 columns in your control panel, and you automatically get 2 columns in that area. Now, looking at this, especially because you've still got those bullets applied, it may be that you have too much space between these columns. Well, if you want to change that, you go right below it to your gutter. Let's go to the down arrow, and that is slowly bringing those columns a little bit closer together.